So also with a faithful single who is doing the hard work of waiting, of being faithful with what they have, that we can also look to that as a picture of the bride waiting, but with hope that one day the groom will come.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Alongside Podcast, which is a production of Heritage Baptist Church. The purpose of this podcast is to come alongside followers of Christ in order to have thoughtful conversations about the gospel, culture, and the church. I'm your host, Mike Crump, and today's show is on a subject that can often be overlooked in the church. While the church should focus on the importance of marriage and living the gospel life in that context, many times we can miss opportunities to engage and encourage singles in the church in the very same way. Therefore, today we will be talking about singleness in the church. To help me in this important discussion are Dave Ashburn, Chelsea Barnwell, and the man with a million books, Pastor Jeff Scott. Welcome, everyone, to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike.
Very excited about this one. I've talked to each of you separately in different ways about this conversation because let's just be honest, sometimes it can be an awkward conversation. We're not trying to point out singles, but we do want to be able to help minister to and care for and love singles in a way that they would receive well. So let's just jump into the conversation, and I'd love to hear from each of y'all why you personally are interested in this discussion. So, Jeff, you want to hear the eldest? Do you want to start?
I have a book for that.
Of course you do.
I'm interested in it because there's a large percentage of Americans, and a growing number, who are single and who will remain single. And then many married folk in our churches will one day also lose a spouse and will be single as well. So this is a broad scope of our congregation that I think we need to be very intentional in ministering to and helping them come to a place of flourishing in their walk with the Lord. Okay.
Dave, what about you?
Yeah, so my interest comes from a lot of personal experience. I was single until I was 32. So and during that time, spent a lot of time in ministry and with both the time as a single person and as a married guy, I have worked with young adults and singles for the last really 15 years. It's been a part of something that I've been doing in the church. And so I like to say that I was single long enough around the church to see people do singleness really well. Yeah. And others to do it really poorly. And so it's been a passion of mine for a long time, having experienced that period of time, an extended singleness in my own life, to encourage people to seize opportunities that come from singleness. And so it's a passionate conversation of mine.
Okay, awesome. And Chelsea?
Yes, so I am still a single. I have been a single my whole adult life, so definitely from personal experience, definitely have many friends who are also still single and want to be able to minister to them and encourage the church to be looking out for singles and understand some of their needs.
Why do you think, and anybody can answer this, why do you think it's so important for the church to have this conversation? I mean, to not just assume, that everything's good to go, but to focus on it a bit.
I think there are a lot of unhealthy perspectives, particularly from both sides, married couples versus singles, that there are just a lot of unhealthy thinking in relationship to the value of singlehood and how to navigate that season of life for people. So I think it's critically important that we set some expectations of what is and what isn't, and what's right, what's wrong in this area, and how we minister to people.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's also just important the body caring for the different members. So especially for those who are married, being able to understand, empathize with those who are single, be able to support them, and as well as vice versa. Be able to have that conversation.
I also think it's easy for the onlooker or the person who's experiencing at a time to build it up as a part of their identity. And there's so much more to a person, and so to allow your relationship status to assume too great of a part of your identity and take away from who you are in Christ and how God can use you now, or when He will do something in your life, or anything like that, to allow it to steal that away, is faulty. Whether that's for you as the onlooker to somebody who's in this experience right now, or as the single person who's waiting for life to happen, because I think we can miss that in the moment.
I think that is a crucial thing. I think for anyone in any walk of life, but if for this discussion, the reality of our identity, specifically being in Christ as being our foundation compared to the relational aspect. So that is part of that discussion. But obviously there are multifacets to all of this. So with that said, let's start with the concept of singleness to begin with. What are the benefits and also the difficulties of being single? Kind of giving a understanding for those who, like, I was married early. Like my first year of college, I ended up married. So I don't have that experience. And so for me, I love to hear kind of the other side of things. And first, why is it such a difficulty? What are some of the difficulties as a single that maybe those who were married early or haven't been there have experienced?
Yeah, well, in my experience, there can be assumptions made on you by people from caring people, even on how difficult you might be to live with, or something. Just there are assumptions being made and sometimes voiced in difficult ways. So there are difficulties in just that relational aspect. There's the reality of going home to an empty house instead of to a family. That's difficult. That there are benefits to that at times as well, but that's often a difficulty, having to shoulder all of the weight of adulting by yourself. Instead of having a teammate to do a lot of that with, provides difficulty in a very dynamic season of life.
Yeah,
that's hard. And then some presumptions, even when we think of ministering in the church, is how qualified are you to do things if this part of your life is still in flux?
Gotcha.
Or do you consider it in flux? Some of those perceptions are hard, but then just life in general can have added difficulty. I read Chelsea's blog post recently about some of this, and I think it was beneficial to hear some of those thoughts on her part. I'd love to have her share that too.
Yeah, thank you. I think for me, one of the biggest difficulties is just the loneliness, and some of that may depend on personalities. I am not introverted. So coming home to an empty house, that is a big struggle. And especially certainly there's the possibility of roommates, but the older the single is, that becomes less likely. Just doing life on your own is very challenging. I think also, again, that responsibility side of you have the freedom to make a decision on your own, but you also have the responsibility to make a decision on your own. There's not someone to double check, kind of balance each other out. If it's an area where you're not as comfortable in, this is a decision I made, I hope that was the right one, but I don't have another person's feedback to really help with that. So I think, the loneliness and then not having that shared teamwork for the responsibility are two of the big factors that are challenging for me.
On the flip side of that, what could you say are maybe some of the benefits of being single? You kind of alluded to some of that.
I think I do think there is freedom in being a single. Though if you're not a single, then I would, just pause and kind of think through. That might mean different things for different people when we say freedom.
Yeah.
For example, people have mentioned to me like, oh, well, you're free to travel. And as a single woman, not so much. I wish I could. Maybe there's a freedom in my schedule, but in practicality, it's actually much more difficult for me to travel. But I do have freedom in other areas. There is a little more freedom just in my daily schedule to determine things, to decide if I want to be involved in different ministries or different relationships, where I'm going to invest.
Yeah.
And I have had more time to devote to art and writing and some of the things that I enjoy that I probably wouldn't have if I was married and my attention was there instead. So kind of channeling that attention somewhere else, having the freedom to do that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think there are lots of opportunities that come when you are making those decisions and operating your schedule by yourself without those things, without the additional responsibilities of family or kids or what have you. So, for example, I spent the early part of a career single and was able to press really hard into that career and to probably unhealthy levels of late nights in the office and
those 80-hour weeks, 90-hour weeks, no problem.
But it didn't affect anybody else.
Yeah.
And so I consider that a benefit, whether or an opportunity seized. Maybe I should put it that way. It's not necessarily a pattern that I would push on to anybody else's life to say this is the way it should be done, but when it's served up to you that way, to not miss out on that opportunity. And so I look back on the whole decade of my 20s, which included college and then beginning career and grad school and all of the things that were able to take place in that time period. I am incredibly grateful for, even though I watched a lot of friends get married, have kids, kind of move on in another stage of life. There were benefits to me in being able to travel. So not travel alone, I get that, but it did give me opportunities to travel with mission teams, or in my case, I was a youth pastor and taking students on these trips and never leaving a family at home without me to worry about. I was able to think in really large, unbound terms of how God might use me in maybe wild and crazy ways that wouldn't happen otherwise. And so that's I think the benefit is being able to seize more opportunities that present themselves.
Gotcha. That would make sense. Now, the big question is, I think for all of us here, is does the Bible say anything about this subject? Because we can talk about the trade-offs of singleness versus married life and some of those tensions that are there. But ultimately, we need to look into the Scriptures and consider what the Bible says. Jeff, does the Bible say anything about singleness?
I think it says a lot about singleness. The first passage I think we go to is 1 Corinthians 7. And there's just some interesting things there because, Paul is dealing with a church that has multiple issues, but in this chapter, he's really honing in on encouraging the Corinthian believers to remain and flourish in the situation of life that they find themselves in. And so he talks about himself being single and thriving and flourishing in that state, and he's giving permission in light of that as well. So,
well, and you had mentioned that before the program is really there's something in the actual wording itself that's important for us. So I'm going to read verse 6 of chapter 7 because I think that's one of those, or actually 6 through 9, one of those passages where we see this spoken about. And Paul writes, he says, "Now as a concession, not a command, I say this. I wish that all were as myself am, But each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. To the unmarried and the widow I say that it is good for them to remain single, as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. So we see here that he's saying, well, it's a concession, not a command. And you said there's actually something in the terms there that is just helpful for context.
Yeah, I think the word concession can actually be translated permission. And so Paul is giving permission. It's a positive affirmation rather than, okay, if you're in this situation,
Yeah.
And then in the word remain, the word remain means to abide. It's the same word that we would find in John 15, but it's not the word it's not hupomeno, it's the word meno. Hupomeno means to remain under the pressure. That's not the word that's used here. So it's not used in a negative way. It's used in a positive way, to remain. It gives you the idea of flourishing and moving forward.
Yeah. Now, Chelsea, you wrote about this concept, your blog, which is fantastic. I appreciate your writing. Welcome to thecarriagehouse.com if you would like to read some of her stuff. But you wrote one specifically called The Gift of Singleness, or Gifts from Singleness. Can you share just a little bit of your thoughts from that, if you remember what you wrote about? Because it really was, I thought, a very helpful context.
Yeah, I would love to. I wrote that in response to having people tell me that singleness is a gift. I looked more at this passage and was like, I don't think that's what it's saying, or at least not in the way that they're meaning it, of that everyone who is a single has been given this gift of singleness in those terms. I was thinking, in this passage, as you're saying, it does say this is a concession, not a command. It seemed to me from my reading of it that this was more something, when it says each person has their own gift, that God gives different kinds of gifts to different people. There may be some who were like Paul and are willing to be single for the sake of the ministry, and God's given them that contentment and focus to be able to do that. But not every person who is still single has been given that gift, which is why there's still that freedom to marry. And that is what is best for many. And I would even say best for most. When I was zooming back and thinking big picture of the Bible, it really struck me, thinking back to the Genesis account, that the first thing that is not good was actually before the fall, and it was not good that man was alone, and those were God's words. And that shows a lot of just the importance of marriage. Marriage is a gift and blessing. And yet, as Paul is saying, there is still that permission to be single. There are advantages to being single, but it doesn't mean to discount the potential hardships of being single, that not good aspect of being single.
And maybe that's where a lot of times this passage is taken and applied in a broad brush kind of way. It's like, well, if you're feeling any twinge of discomfort from being single, you're just not seeing it in the light of Paul, rather than coming alongside and saying, hey, I get it. I understand that this season you long for marriage, you want to move in that direction. And then right next to that is kind of what you were talking about, Dave, is that yet still seeing the position in life as an opportunity to do such and such. And I think that's what we see kind of culminating in verse 17, where Paul says, only let each person lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him and to which God has called him. This is the rule in any of the churches. Not that if you're single, you got to stay that way, but it's, if you find yourself there, then, and I think to use your term, you flourish in that space, seeking the Lord. In my mind, that's kind of where the full context of that is.
I'm sitting here thinking I've been married more than half my life, and so, but I do remember back being single and some of these battles and they were stretching times. They were not easy times. I was the last in my friend group to actually get married. But I know several singles within our church that have had this friend group. They're the last one to get married. They develop another friend group. They're the last one to get married. And so this is this ongoing thing for them. It's just not easy. But yet at the same time, as wonderful as marriage is, it's not easy either. It's still a lot of work that you have to lean into as well. So I'm just sitting here processing, going, no matter what stage you're in, no matter what that is, it's not always easy, and it requires us to work. But there's benefits and advantages and all of it.
So with all of that, let's kind of dive into how the church can be part of this as a whole. And even, yes, HBC, we have always room to grow in this area and many others. But how can a church better care for singles? I personally feel weird even saying that. It's almost like they're, unable, like, sorry, Chelsea, you're just not. No, I mean, being single is not some sort of terrible thing. It's not some sort of, disease that you're carrying around. It is a state of life that you are in. Yet, I think we can consider how we can, as a church, come alongside singles. And so how would you guys say, or encouragements would you give to our church in regards to how to come alongside singles?
Well, I love that our version of a small group community at Heritage leans heavily towards multi-generational and multi-relational contexts, and so I think there's a big benefit that in our discipleship communities, which is that here that we have that opportunity for crossing demographic lines within a group, because I think that's a good starting point.
Yeah.
But within that is being conscious of the language that we use. If we're just conscious of the fact that not everybody's in the same category, and that goes in all kinds of areas. Another area an area that I'm very involved in is our young adults and college students, and thinking in terms of there's not just one set of college students or students that all attend one college here at Heritage, and even young adults don't all fall into the college student category. They fall into working young professionals, and so to think in broader terms of identity is, I think, a healthy next step. For us is to make sure we're conscious of the variety of people that are in these groups, which we want to celebrate, because that is a picture of what the local church is a hopefully multi-ethnic, multi-generational, multi-demographic group. And so we're speaking in greater terms.
And you hinted at it, but I would like to kind of get a little bit more specific, and that is in the terminology. What are some of the well-meaning, hopefully, phrases or encouragements that maybe you all have heard that maybe aren't the best, or maybe can be misunderstood or taken the wrong way?
Well, for me, and I don't want to monopolize, but
go ahead, Dave. You're fine.
For me, I think even just addressing a group and in the statements inadvertently categorizing people, married couples and singles and whatever. I just don't know that it's helpful. I don't think it's helpful. Yeah, I think you can back away from that and say we as a group are doing this. Maybe gotcha. Men are going here and women are going here, and you don't need a ton of subcategories of if you have a job you're this, or if you're retired you're this, or if you're. We are the church, or we are a collection of people within the church. So even using those categories isn't always helpful.
We do like our boxes.
We do.
We do like our boxes, and I think we feel like we have a handle on things with that. But the reality is we are in Christ together, right? So that's ultimately the greatest of categories. So, Chelsea, you have any thoughts on?
Yeah, I already kind of mentioned singleness as a gift, being as a sort of blanket that makes you feel better kind
Yeah.
of thing. You're
Yeah.
enjoying this gift. That can sometimes be hurtful. I think also, when people make assumptions, when they say things like, oh, well, you have so much freedom, again, not realizing the other side of it. I guess maybe just a general principle is just, asking singles about their experience instead of assuming and telling them what their experience is.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you're, so I think that's beneficial. I don't know. One thought, even thinking sometimes when I hear people talk about their spouses, and I absolutely think that everyone should verbally affirm their spouse, should praise their spouse in public, those kinds of things. That is always such an encouragement to hear. But I tend to really latch on when someone says something like, I couldn't have done it without them. Now, that's me kind of zooming in on that, but that does feel like, okay, so my ministry goals that I want to do, the desires, God's given me, we'll just forget it because it's not going to happen without a spouse, sort of thing. And so now that's a lie that I am believing on my own, but when I hear someone say that, it kind of triggers that again as affirmation, like, yep, they couldn't have done it if they were single. So, so that's just a small thing. Even thinking about that, as you are appreciating and valuing your spouse, just acknowledging that as a married person as well, the dependence, the only thing that you cannot do is without Christ, not without your spouse.
I think in this conversation, a lot of it comes down to just knowing who you're speaking to, and maybe a general rule, or at least maybe wisdom, not necessarily a rule, would be if you do not know that person personally, that maybe it's just best not to even discuss the singleness, and that kind of brings me to the next thing is, how do we as a church welcome singles into community? I think of as a married couple, family, kids all over the place, that kind of thing. How do I welcome singles into that? Because I want to share with them. I want to be an encouragement to them. But I also have to acknowledge that there is a little bit of an awkwardness that can come from that. How can we do that? And I guess maybe, Chelsea, maybe you'd be able to, and I'm not telling you to speak for all of singles at Heritage, but just, does a single person, or is there potential for a single person to feel awkward if a family invites them in? What do you think?
So speaking from my perspective and my personality, that does not feel awkward. That's very welcome to be invited in. I really appreciate it when either couples without kids or families with kids invite me into their homes or invite me to events they're planning, those kinds of things. As Pastor Jeff was saying, especially in Lynchburg, where sort of college town, a lot of transient, there's a lot of young singles in the area, but they move on.
Yeah.
So I have definitely experienced that, of having a good, strong friend group, and then either them all moving away or getting married. And then so it's kind of developing another friend group. So there's definitely a lack of community for many singles on a consistent basis, at least. Not that they don't have any close friends, but it just is very transitory. So I am always very appreciative when people invite me in. And for those, again, maybe there would be some people who would feel awkward about that. Maybe there are some who maybe they are content being single. Maybe they are a very reserved person and they do enjoy that quiet space. But you can always turn down an invitation if it was going to make them uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But being asked, I think, goes a long way, knowing that they were looked out for.
Yeah. Jeff, what would you say, as you are talking with maybe older people in our congregation, DC leaders, those who are, what would be your encouragement to them when it comes to singles? How would you encourage them to engage them?
I think there's going back into part of this previous conversation, just be careful. One of the things that just keeps popping into my mind is the statement, and Chelsea, you address this to a degree, but my spouse completes me, which communicates to some singles that I'm not complete if I'm not married. So I think it's just with great care. I lead one of these cross-generational classes, GCs, that are here. And so even when we come to passages that deal with husband, wife, family-related issues, trying to deal with that without and being inclusive in that, not ignoring the fact that, hey, these are issues that we need to deal with. But I think for the most part, the majority of Scripture is addressing us as individuals, living in community with one another, not necessarily just in the marriage bounds, but in community with one another. So really, I think just encouraging our people to keep that in mind, that the body of Christ is a family that has multiple points of where people are, and bring God's word to where life is. I try to be careful at not using a whole lot of illustrations, even in my own teaching, that are relational married illustrations, but more personal. This is how it impacted me, and this is an illustration of where I failed or whatever. And I'd just be very, I cannot tell you how many times I've had comments come back to me of statements that were made that would just be very, very hurtful. I just encourage great care and wisdom before you say something. I've heard statements, they're single, so what's wrong with them? That one just drives me nuts. Or, well, how come you're not married? And those are just mean statements that we have to really be careful and guard ourselves. I'm not sure if that was helpful, but
no, that's helpful.
Yeah, I think I think it is helpful, and to not walk away from this conversation saying we need to wrap singles in bubble wrap.
We need to baby them.
That's not the end of this either. But this is a very specific picture of, I think, how the body of Christ should treat each other in general. Which is we're to love and spur each other on to good works as we walk with Christ together. And this is, I think, just an honest conversation that one of the targets on the back of singles as they walk with Christ and endure attacks from the enemy is, who am I? And if we can either perpetuate those questions by saying certain things, or we can encourage and help grow people who are following Jesus. So I think that's important for us to say too. It's not all about me changing how I talk, but it's as much about let's just take a step back and consider how we speak to anybody. And this is just one zoomed in picture of how we can care in love with others who love Jesus and are in our local assembly.
Thank you for that, Dave. I think that is such an important truth. Is that these principles we're speaking of aren't just for singles. They're for all of us together. I'm often reminded of Philippians 2 in this, that let each one not look to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. And we see that is a very other-centered mentality. So when I'm approaching somebody to have a conversation, I'm considering this person and how can I communicate in a way that edifies, that encourages, that stirs them up to love and good works. And it's not about me. It's not about maybe getting that barb in, or even just about questioning what's wrong with you. I think in that I'm thinking of 2 Corinthians, where we do not consider one another according to the flesh. That's not the concern. You are a new creation. You are in Christ. So therefore, I consider you my brother, my sister, and wherever God has you in life, that is who you are. And so being mindful of that, because we all have those sensitivities depending on where we are in life. And in Philippians 2, I think of just the incarnational reality that I can enter into the life of another follower of Christ in order to encourage them. And there are ways to do that for singles. In fact, Chelsea, you had mentioned one earlier before the show as well, kind of an example of that.
Yeah. And I was just thinking also, I think singles can sometimes get the perception that they're supposed to do it all on their own if they're not married. I mean, our culture, people turn 18, go to college, and then usually they move out.
Yeah.
You know, they're pretty much
High level of individualism and that,
yeah. So they're on their own. They then have to be intentional if they do want community, and not necessarily romantic relationships, but just any relation. You know, they have to be intentional. They have to, if they want to live more like with people, they need to seek out roommates. They need to seek out the church. They need to seek out ministry partners because they don't have that built-in partner. But then with that, I had an experience where I was sharing some of the frustration I was having over being single, and actually said, you know, I'm open to help. I'm not like closed off. I'm going to do this all by myself, sort of thing. And a lady from our church actually messaged me and said, I don't know what you're going to think about this. She was very cautious, very open-handed. She said, there is someone I would like you to meet. I thought a lot about that. Maybe that would be a good match. Are you open to that? Do you want me to, you know, exchange numbers or something? In the end, she ended up inviting me and this young man over to their family house for dinner and board games. And that didn't go anywhere. You know, we never had a date, anything like that after that. However, I just remember feeling so loved by the body. Not only that she had kind of spoken up, offered something to me. So not trying to set, you know, it wasn't like she invited me over for dinner and someone happened to be there. It was like, oh, okay.
You.
You know, so very, you know, open communication, you know, hey, I'm willing to offer this, but this is up to you if you want to. But then more so that their family was willing to deal with the awkwardness of two people meeting each other who'd never met before. So like they were in it with us kind of thing. Yeah. I was like, just thank you for sharing that awkwardness, because I know that you did it on like our behalf, you know, like, and so I really appreciate that, that willingness on their part. Felt very loved by that action.
That's awesome. And that is a very practical means of displaying love. And I think to your point, asking you is key, right?
Correct.
That not just thrusting upon you this, hey, we just set you up. And by the way, it's tonight, you know.
And probably if you asked, there would probably be more people who'd be open to that. Again, not everyone will be, but you might be surprised. I've heard a lot of people who are, trying to think of natural ways to set people up. Yeah. And, you know, those never work out. But, but then if singles are asked directly, a lot of them are open to that. Yeah. But just be willing to take it either way.
Nice. Well, thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that, Chelsea.
That probably came well received because of previous relationship with that person too, that couple.
Yes.
So even thinking through the fact that you, as the single person, had an established relationship with this couple where there was trust and and openness. That's a great starting point without the agenda of trying to set somebody up.
Exactly.
Too.
Yes, absolutely. And there would be some friends, you know, where maybe I wouldn't take their relationship advice. Like it really depends, you know, on how well they know me. And so in that case, it was a specific case because I did know their family and trusted them for sure.
So maybe a first step for many in Heritage who may be wondering about this is, if you're a married couple, maybe just be in prayer for the singles of the church, and then be open to forming a relationship. Not a relationship for the means of trying to get them, you know, connected with somebody, but that you would be able to minister to them. And if in the context of that, to your point, in which the story you just shared, there is an opportunity, then talk to them about it. Let's treat each other as people loved by Christ, part of the body of Christ. And if you start from that context, usually God's gonna work. Right.
If I could just add a thought to that.
Yeah.
There's great opportunities for us to learn on this other side.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm going to invite somebody into my home or into my life, I'm going to invest into them. But the reciprocal side of that, as I learn so much, I'm enriched as a person by being involved with people from different walks of life.
Yeah.
So I would hate for the idea that I need to jump into this situation so I can help.
Yeah.
These are adults that have so much to offer me in my journey with Jesus as well.
I love that. Thank you, Jeff. No, I agree. We can't, and this is just across the board, we can't see people as projects. Please don't see people as projects. See people as people, imago Dei, created in the image of God. They have been redeemed by Christ and are valuable, and they can teach us and we can learn from. And that is what it is to submit to one another in love inside the church. And that's where we find just great fruitfulness, and personally and also in the community. So any final thoughts, guys, before we wrap it up?
I was just thinking with that, scriptures talked about how a husband and wife are a picture of Christ in the church, and that's a beautiful image. Again, I think one of the reasons marriage is, to be revered is holy. It's a gift. But someone pointed out to me, and I can't remember the book that it came from, but thinking, okay, so for a single who feels left out of that equation, like, I'm not a part of that picture of Christ in the church because I'm not married. The single really is representing the faithful bride waiting for the groom to come back. And so as we can look at a godly married couple and we can see a little bit of that picture of Christ in the church and learn from that. So also with a faithful single who is doing the hard work of waiting, of being faithful with what they have, that we can also look to that as a picture of the bride waiting, but with hope that one day the groom will come.
Beautiful. I think we're going to end on that because that was a beautiful picture of singleness, waiting on Christ and being that image. Thank you so much, Chelsea. Well, thank you guys for being here. I think it's been a fun program and show, and hopefully will be an encouragement to all those who are out there here at Heritage. Well, this has been another episode of the Alongside Podcast. For more details on Alongside, including show notes, past episodes, and more, you can visit alongsidepodcast.com. Also, wherever you may be listening to this, make sure you leave 5-star reviews so others can hear about Alongside and be encouraged in their faith. I'm your host, Mike Crump. Thanks for listening, and we hope you'll join us next time as we continue to come alongside other followers of Christ in order to have thoughtful conversations about the gospel, culture, and the church.